There's more to imagine when you listen. So let your imagination soar with Audible. Audible has audio titles from every genre that will inspire you to imagine new worlds, possibilities, and ways of thinking. As an Audible member, you get to choose one title a month to keep from their entire catalog. Enjoy an exciting reawakening of a beloved classic with the Audible original, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Produced by Academy Award-winning director Sam Mendes. Starring Ncuti Gatwa, Helena Bonham Carter, and Theo James. This adaptation breathes new life into a familiar tale. New members can try Audible free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/imagine or text IMAGINE to 500-500. That's audible.com/imagine or text IMAGINE to 500-500.
Welcome to Money for the Rest of Us, a personal finance show on money, how it works, how to invest it, and how to live without worrying about it. I'm your host, David Stein, and today is episode 64. It's titled The Pitfalls of Private Real Estate Investing. 64 episodes, over a year of the podcast, and I've not done an episode on investing in rental real estate. There are some fine podcasts out there that cover it, and so I chose not to cover it for a couple of reasons. Well, first off, even though I've spent much of my investment career assisting institutional clients in investing in private real estate, they invested in office buildings, skyscrapers, apartments, building lots, rental storage unit type facilities, and all different types, both private. I've assisted them in investing in real estate investment trust, which are securities that in turn hold private real estate. I've co-founded a direct alternatives group that identified and conducted due diligence on real estate managers. I myself had never, except for owning some land, from owning homes, had never invested my own capital in a private real estate deal. In other words, I've not bought any rental real estate before up until last year. So I couldn't speak from experience, direct experience. I could always speak from an institutional side, investing in funds. So I knew how to identify a top-tier real estate manager. I just hadn't gotten my hands dirty in owning an actual property up until now. Although I don't own it anymore. So which is hence the topic, the pitfalls of private real estate investing. About 13 months ago, our realtor, who I've known for a number of years, he is a real estate investor himself. He's a contractor. He's very, very tied into our local market. He called me up one day and said, "You need to come see this property today." And so I went with Lapril and we looked at this single-family home. It was built in, I believe, the late 50s. It was an interesting home because you had the main brick home, but then attached to it was this A-frame sort of cabin-type structure. And in the back, there was 3 garages. There was a 2-car garage, a little storage shed, and then a separate kind of garage. So essentially, there was space for 3 cars. And what was interesting is this particular property had been owned by the founder of a brickyard. And by brickyard, a yard that sold bricks and stone. And so there was a lot of pavement. In other words, there wasn't a whole lot of landscaping. There was some. It was tasteful, but there was a lot of pavers, and it was an ideal setup potentially for a rental unit. Now, we looked at it, and because this had been in a state and it hadn't hit the market yet, we had to make the decision very, very quickly and kind of look at it. And there was a couple things in our favor. One, well, first off, when you invest in private real estate or any investment, particularly when it's something outside of traditional securities markets, when you're not using some type of passive investment strategy, when you're going to try to add value somehow, you need to focus on, well, what is your competitive edge? What type of informational insight do you have to allow you to be successful at this investment? And in my case, what I knew was the local zoning laws. I had spent 6 years on our planning and zoning commission, so I was there during the heart of the real estate boom. And so I knew our zoning, and I knew this particular property was in this zone called the PED zone, which is a area right around the private college. We have a private school university in our town. It's about 15,000 students. And we had set up this zone right around there where essentially builders could build 5 or 6 story units. And so which means the land, if you can build a 5 or 6 story unit, it potentially is a much more expensive piece of property. And so as we looked at this property, we were really going to buy it for the value of the land. And so the property itself was, I think, I won't get into the numbers, but it was under $200,000 for the property. But my first question to my realtor is, well, because he invests in real estate, why aren't you buying this? If this is such a great deal, and potentially we're buying it for about half of what the land could be worth if a builder came along and wanted to build a 5 or 6 story apartment building, why aren't you buying it? And which is, in my mind, a valid question. And in his case, he had just bought another property, and so he didn't have the liquidity to necessarily buy this unit. And so we looked at it, and what was going to be interesting about this was going to be, there was an opportunity down the road to sell the property. You can say flip the property, I guess, to a developer. But the key thing would be a core real estate deal. So unleveraged, low risk, and the opportunity to, because there was so much construction going on, to have construction workers come live in this apartment. And they would essentially, you could put 6 or 8 or 10 construction workers here, and they wouldn't need to furnish it, and potentially get a yield of 15 to 17%. That seemed like a great opportunity. And if that didn't work out, there's a number of beauty schools, hairstylist schools. I'm not even using the right word. Well, you know what I mean. Where they're training hairstylists to learn how to cut hair, and potentially could rent to 5 or 6 of these students. So it would be almost dorm-like and a pretty high yield, because with the potential for this particular property to be bought out, we wouldn't need to do much work on it. We just hold it, we could rent it out, and it seemed like a no-brainer. So we put an offer on, and because it was an estate, the owner, it was actually the brick founder's mom that had lived there. She had passed away, and she had a reverse mortgage on this building. And what a reverse mortgage is, you essentially, the mortgage company, instead of you borrowing money and getting a lump sum with a reverse mortgage, the mortgage company actually sends these elderly retirees a check every month. So essentially you're spending down the equity in your home. They're not necessarily good or bad. The fees can be really high for these reverse mortgages. You have to look at them very closely. But for some retirees, it's a viable option, and that's what this particular retiree had done. The challenge is our offer ended up being less than what was owed to the reverse mortgage company. So we had to bump it up another $5,000 to $10,000. It took forever for this property to close, about a month for the offer to finally be accepted and to get closed. And so we had it. We had our first rental property. I just said, well, I'm going to go get a property manager. So I got a property manager, had him come visit, and he said, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of construction workers that can come stay here. There's maybe I can check around, but there's a couple downsides to this. One, if you bring in construction workers, your neighbors are going to hate you because they smoke, they drink, they're noisy, and it ends up being somewhat of a party house. And I thought, maybe I don't want that. The other red flag is I said, well, what about the zoning aspect of that? What about the permits? And this particular property manager was sort of laid back about it in the sense that he said, oh, yeah, we'll handle that. Besides, this is Idaho. There really isn't a whole lot you have to do. Now, after 6 years on Planning and Zoning Commission, I knew that wasn't quite the case. And then I asked him about, so I made some calls. I knew some construction, some contractors to just kind of see, is it true there really isn't this market for construction workers to come live in our apartment? And he verified it. So at least at that point, that had gone away. And it was most of the construction workers around town were locals and didn't need a place to live. So I started making some more calls. And this is pitfall number one. Even if there's pressure to do the deal because of timing, at least do some additional due diligence. So I made some other calls. It turned out the beauty students coming, or the hairstylist school students, wasn't going to work out either. And I called another property developer that I knew, and he happened to mention that there was, the way this private school works is they give permission to build these 5-story apartment buildings because the students, they have what's called approved housing. And the waiting list to be able to build one of the apartment buildings was about 5 years, which meant there wasn't going to be a developer coming in the next year to purchase this property at twice what we paid. And I quickly realized what was going to be what's known as a cap rate. And a cap rate in the institutional real estate space is your net annual cash flow divided by what you paid for the building. So your gross rents, less expensive, taxes, insurance, and perhaps some repair cost. Divide that total cash by your purchase price, that gets your cap rate. It was going to be 15 to 17% had we been able to rent out to construction workers and not have to do any type of investment in the property. That wasn't going to be the case. We needed to do some investment. And so I had a contractor that I knew that had done work on our home, and I trusted him. And that's the key. You need advisors that you can trust, even if the advisors have flaws. And most advisors or contractors, they run businesses and they're not perfect, and it became pretty clear that our contractor was not perfect. And when we talk about pitfalls is understand your role, because when I talk about some of the challenges we had as we decided to invest more money in this building, in my mind, I was thinking, I'm hiring a general contractor. They're going to get it done. But in reality, in the contractor's mind, they were a contractor. I was the general contractor, which means I'm the one that needed to manage the job, not necessarily them. And that not understanding the roles became a little bit of a challenge down the road. So we looked at this, we brought the contractor in, and one reason I like them is because they're pretty creative in terms of taking this single-family home. How can we convert this into a rental property? And we decided we're going to convert it into a triplex. So we're going to put a wall between the house and the A-frame, and the A-frame would be this really cool studio apartment. Had a circular staircase that went up into a loft, and so it was going to be essentially a studio with a loft. And then we were going to divide the basement of the house and the upstairs, and those would each be their own apartments. And so our yield on this, which was going to be 15, 17%, was dropping down to 10% or so. Except that, the bid, as I look back, that I didn't quite get a firm bid on the project. I got an estimate, and this is where I realized that this wasn't. I was the general contractor, because the bids would come in like project at a time. So here's what it's going to cost to put the door in. Here's what it's going to cost to put one kitchen in, perhaps the other. And it wasn't a complete project. It was a piecemeal effort. And having never done a project like this, I wasn't quite sure. We kind of ballparked what it was going to be, but we went in. The first surprise was realizing I get a call from my contractor. He says, the city says the permits for this is going to be $6,000. And I about fell on the floor. And so I went into the city, and because I'd been on Planning and Zoning Commission for many years, I knew the players, and I said, how can, this is a little conversion, how can this be $6,000? And they walk through, and we have something in our town called the impact fees, which pays for when you do a conversion like this or a big unit, it's about $1,200, $2,000 per unit to actually, that goes to the parks, goes to the fire department. And I remembered I'm the one that passed this and actually walked it through, and now it's coming back to bite. And so the fees were $6,000. We paid them, and the work continued, and this went through the summer, and I remember getting a call from the contractor saying, you might want to go get some renters because we're going to be done in a couple weeks. And I thought, there's no way they're going to be done in a couple weeks. And so I didn't get renters. In fact, we didn't actually rent that. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Let me pause here to share some words from this week's sponsors.
I bought a used denim coat from a reseller, Odyssey Rebuild. I'd never heard of them. They came across my Instagram feed. But I took the leap. I bought the coat, and once I saw the reseller was using Shopify, I felt a lot more confident in my purchase. I got a confirmation email from Shopify. I got confirmation when the item was shipped and one when it arrived, and I could track it all along. Businesses that want to grow use Shopify because they're able to sell whenever their customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in their store, on their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify, just as Odyssey Rebuild does. Most of the e-commerce I do with small retailers, they're using Shopify. And you can upgrade your business and get the same checkout Odyssey Rebuild uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/David, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/David to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/David. Ever wonder how much of your personal data is out there on the internet for anyone to see? More than you think. Your name, contact info, social security number, and home address. Even information about your family members. That's why I personally recommend and use Delete Me. Delete Me finds and removes any personal information you don't want online and makes sure it stays off. I've been using Delete Me for 9 months now, and they've removed a ton of my personal data from the internet and sent me regular personalized privacy reports showing info they found, where they found it, and what they removed. I just got my latest quarterly report from them. Delete Me does all the hard work of removing yours and your family's personal info off the web. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me now at a special discount for our listeners today. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/David20 and use promo code David20 at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/David20 and enter code David20 at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/David20, code David20.
Time passed, they continue to work, and here's how contractors work, at least from my experience. Maybe they don't do this elsewhere. They like to start jobs. They're not real keen on finishing them. They would rather they're like juggling balls. They keep 5 or 6 projects or balls up in the air at once, and whoever screams the loudest gets the most attention. I'm not a screamer. I'd rather they just do it. I don't want to badger people to get the work done. And as the general contractor, that was my job, and it wasn't a job I wanted to do. And as a result, November came and it still wasn't done. But it was close, and it was time to bring in the final inspection. And the idea was, I'm going to rent this in December. We're going to be good. The final inspection, the inspector from the city comes. He looks at the work. The kitchens look good. We put in a kitchen downstairs, or an existing kitchen upstairs. We put a kitchen in the studio. We separated it out. Everything seemed fine, and I actually didn't go, I didn't go to meet with the inspector. I went afterwards. I figured they're my contractor. They're going to deal with it. So I meet with them afterward, about an hour, and I said, well, how did it go? And they said, well, it went pretty good. There were a couple issues. The main issue is he says we need to have a separate heating source for each unit. And I'm like, what? Yeah, each unit needs their own furnace. This is a house with one furnace. This is a little bit of a setback. And there was that, and a number of the windows aren't big enough. You're going to have to replace a number of windows. And the fire barrier between the upstairs and the downstairs isn't good enough. We're going to have to put in more sheetrock between the ceilings. So it turns out in the studio, there was a gas fireplace, which was going to be enough to heat that. So we only needed to put in a new furnace. Now, this is where a couple things. One, this contractor hadn't done this type of work before in terms of the conversion, so they weren't as familiar with the rules as they should have been. As a general contractor, I should have known the rules. I didn't know the rules. But they were creative in figuring out how to get a new furnace in. And separate. And if we're going to do a new furnace, then we're going to charge each unit separately for their gas. We're going to put in new meters, so we're going to go ahead and put in new hot water heaters. And essentially, there was going to be a delay in the project. They said they could have it done in 3 weeks, so I still get my renters in. December comes, I start getting my renters. I put up a website, and I came to another pitfall. I had no idea what rents were. And it turns out rents were not as high as I thought. So my yield, again, is falling. The other thing I realized I just didn't know is people really, really wanted a washer and dryer hookup in their apartments. And this is something I just hadn't monitored. There just weren't as many laundromats as there used to be. And we hadn't put washer and dryer hookups in. And so we were able to rent the studio to our friends because that was done. But the other apartments weren't complete yet. And this is coming through December, and we're heading to Phoenix at the beginning of January. We're going to be gone for 2 months. And it was getting really close to the wire. The job wasn't done. I'm trying to get the contractor to do it. And I get the one renters in, and we decide, all right, I'm not going to rent the rest of the apartment till we get back from Arizona in March in California, because I don't want calls in while I'm gone that I can't handle, because I never could find a property manager. I was going to do it myself in order to bump up my income. So our renters move in December, and here's another pitfall when you're the manager. Renters have a right to call you when they have a problem. And they called me on New Year's Eve at 8 p.m. to say, we don't have any hot water. And I thought, oh, crap. Because I don't know how to fix stuff like that. So I go over there, and I see these 3 hot water heaters. I'm not sure which one goes to their apartment, but it doesn't appear to be on. And what it turned out was the pipes were frozen. And I called the contractor because I didn't know who else to call, and they fixed things. They're a repair shop. He came, he solved the issue, and realized what it was and why it had happened and won't happen again. So I got taken care of. But it left me with a really bad taste, because it turns out, having left my professional investment career several years ago, I just don't like people to call me up when they need something. So particularly, I mean, renters have an absolute right to call me up, but I hated the idea of somebody calling me with a problem that I had to solve. And I got another call while we were gone about the internet, and I realized I have to get a property manager for this unit. I'm just not going to do it myself. While we were in Arizona, I got a call out of the blue, and it was a guy I hadn't heard of, and he says, "I'd like to buy your apartment." But he didn't come across as terribly professional. It was I didn't know who he was. I thought he was toying with me, honestly. And he just, and we had a number of conversations. I said, well, when I get back, come look at it. And so when we got back in March, the apartment still wasn't done. Our contractor hadn't finished the work. Now, the advantage of this contractor is he never billed us. He had done work for 6 months. I'd paid him once, about $15,000. He hadn't paid us for anything. And of that $15,000, $6,000 went to the city for fees. So he had been doing all this work without billing me. And so I thought, well, he's not going to bill me, then I'm not going to pay him, and the job's not done. So I got on the phone. We worked it out. And that's the key with contractors. Right? You don't want to burn bridges, because if these are people you trust, and I did trust them. I did trust them. I didn't necessarily like their time management, but I appreciated their creativity in figuring out how to get furnaces in and do the duct work and how to make this work. I appreciated their honesty. I liked the fact they didn't bill me for many, many months, so I didn't have to put capital in. But I didn't like the fact that the job hadn't got done. So we worked through it, and I had the guy that wanted to buy the apartment come and see it. And he just came and looked at it, and he's standing there with his property manager. And I said, well, what do you think? And they just kind of stood there, not saying anything. And not having been in this situation, it was a little awkward. Just sort of hemming and hawing. And I finally said, well, why don't I let you guys think about it, and I'm going to leave. 2 hours later, they're still standing in the parking lot, still thinking about it. And so I never got an offer. I decided to go find a property manager. I asked around again, and I just couldn't find one. But one of the people I talked to was a realtor, and she gave me really some insight into the fact that, what's this property worth as being part of this bed zone from a developer? And gave me some comps, and it turned out the property itself might not even be worth as much as I thought, even 5 years down the road. So now I have this property, and I couldn't find anyone to manage it, because it turns out with property managers, their incentive is to rent it for as low as possible. And I just didn't want to take the low rents. My yield, which had been 17%, that I thought was going to be 10, was now dropping down to 7 to 8%. And that seemed low to me. So it was at this point I decided, with that the problem with our town is there seems to be a cap on rents. The way that real estate goes up in value is you have to raise the rent, so your cash flow goes up. And the other thing I realized is if there seems to be a cap on rents because of competition, as interest rates go up, if my rents aren't going up, the value of my property is going down. And it was at that point that I decided, I just think I want to sell it. So I contacted my realtor, and I wanted to get an idea what cap rates were, what were buildings selling for, and they were selling at 6.5% to 7% cap rates, which means you take your net rent and divide it by the cap rate, and that gets your value. And I looked at that amount, and by then I had paid my contractor. They had got done, and I thought, hey, I could make a decent return on this apartment if I sell it now. And so he listed it, and I said, you should talk to this guy that I spoke to that wanted to buy the building and see if he's interested. And at the end of the day, he convinced the guy that I originally meant to buy the building. He worked with the negotiation. It's like, I guess I could have negotiated, but he got it through. It finally closed last week. We made about 17% for a 13-month holding period. So it ended well, but I realized that real estate is a lot of work. And unless you can find the ideal property manager that you buy a turnkey building, which this wasn't, this is what's known, this was value-added real estate. So you have core real estate where it's fully rented, you just buy the building, you collect your rents, and there's value-added real estate projects where you go in, you invest in the building, you come up with these pitfalls, you overcome them. I don't know if this is a typical project. Many, many times when you invest, you learn as you go. We learned as we went with this investment. It ended well. I realized I don't want to be a property manager, and I much prefer paper assets, stocks, bonds, other type of investments where I just don't have to get my hands dirty because it's just not necessarily a skill set of mine. So understand who you are as an investor. And real estate can be profitable. I mean, I had a pretty good return for 13 months, but you have to know what type of investor you are. And sometimes you just don't realize it without actually doing it. We learned from the experience, and that is episode 64. Any questions, you can email me, jd@jdavidstein.com. Show notes for this episode, and I'm not sure there are going to be any, but for other episodes, show notes are at moneyfortherestofus.net. That's also where you can sign up for my Insider's Guide, and I'll email those show notes to you weekly. That's also when I'm sending other valuable content, including samples of pretty valuable content or interesting content we're doing on the Money for the Rest of Us Hub. The Hub is closed for new members currently, but will be opening in September. Opening in batches now so that we have a really on-hands introductory process for new members. So you can get information on that at moneyfortherestofushub.com and sign up for an email list, and I'll notify you when we're opening it up to new members. Everything I've shared with you in this episode is for general education only. I've not considered your specific risk profile. I've not provided investment advice. It's simply general education on money, investing, and the economy. Have a great week.